Good evening. Let me tell you a story of where I've been, the rise of each new road, and the surprise around each new corner. The story of the falling rain and the winds that nearly blew me right out of my shoes. How the river carried me down its windy banks. How each road, trail, and path led me here to you. Good evening again. My name is Jason Ferreira, and I work for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as an outdoor educator. I recently accomplished a goal of getting my certified interpretive guide certification, and I'm an all around great guy. And tonight, we're going to talk about storytelling. When two or more people gather, a story is sure to be told. Storytelling is a universal and is as ancient as humankind. Before there was writing, there was storytelling. It occurs in every culture and every age. It exists to entertain, to inform, and to pass down cultural and traditional values. Oral storytelling is storytelling through voices and gestures. The oral tradition can take many forms, including epic poems, chants, rhymes, songs, and so many more. Not all these stories are historically accurate or even true. Truth is less important than providing cultural cohesion. We often acknowledge the native lands that we live and work on. I live here on Miwok and coastal Maidu ancestral lands. But I came here via airplane from New Jersey many years ago. But the Miwok, we could tell their story of how they came to be. How the raven became people is one of the the Miwok creation stories. How the ravens became people. There was an epic flood, and the first world people climbed a mountain to avoid drowning. The water finally receded. They were starving. They thought it would be safe to come down and look for food, but they sank into the mud and died. The ravens came to sit on the holes where the people died. One raven at each hole. The ravens turned into new people, the Miwok. So even in our land acknowledgments, we have an opportunity to tell stories, to help people connect more deeply with the place and the people who live in it. But what makes a good story? Well, many things. First, know your audience. It's critical to determine how long a story should be and what kind of language you should be using. Before beginning a story, spend about 5 minutes thinking about who you are targeting. Make them care. Easier said than done. Whether emotionally, intellectually, you need to make your audience care. This is important in our world. People tend to gloss over posts and skim through content without really connecting or actually caring about what they're reading. It's our job to try to make them care. Set the scene. We experience the world through our senses. So if you really want to fully capture your audience, you must engage their senses. Set the scene and provide your audience with the context of the story. When telling a story in the woods, have them touch the trees. Have them take a moment and take a deep breath and inhale the aroma that is nature. It helps them connect and feel a part of the story they're about to hear. Know your punchline. A story can be funny, meaningful, emotional, or a mix of these things, or something completely different. Be creative, but don't forget to always make it relevant and interesting. And finally, end with a grand finale. Add magic to your story by leaving your audience with a sense of awe. The sort of feeling you get when you leave the movies after a great film. You can do this by leaving them with a big question about humanity or something similar to think about on their way home. Telling a story to a captive audience, i.e., around a fire pit or on a trail, are very different. But a storyteller, no matter where they're telling their story, can directly connect the teller to the listener. Storytelling involves a two-way interaction between a storyteller and one or more listeners. The response of the listeners influences the telling of the story. In fact, storytelling emerges from interaction and cooperative efforts of the teller and the audience. In particular, storytelling does not create an imagery barrier between the speaker and the listener. It's part and partial together. There is no fourth wall to break. Different cultures and situations create different expectations for the exact role of the storyteller and that of the listener. Who speaks, how often, and when. And these can create a different interaction. The interactive nature of storytelling particularly accounts for immediacy and impact. And at best, storytelling can directly and tightly connect the teller and the audience. This story, How the Ostrich Got His Long Neck, is a campfire story. And it talks about what this culture in Africa thinks is an important character trait for its members. I'm going to read this story to you right now. I want you to close your eyes and imagine we're sitting out under the moonlit sky, warm around the fire, as we learn this little something about what we value in our culture. How the Ostrich Got His Long Neck. Mr. Ostrich was a sober-minded, serious husband who was always willing to assist his wife in her family duties. My dear, he said to her one evening, when their large clutch of eggs seemed almost ready to hatch, my black feathers cannot be seen in the darkness. So I will guard our eggs by night, and at the same time keep them warm for you. That way you can leave and relax and enjoy yourself until daybreak each morning. He settled down clumsily to his unaccustomed task, while his flighty wife was more than thankful to be relieved of her duty that she had found a trial. She fluffed up her feathers, and to show how pleased she set off in a joyful, high-stepping dance among the low termite mounds that surrounded their nest. The big birds had chosen a site with care, for they knew that a sitting ostrich hen, with her head down, looks from the distance like a gray mound of earth. They had decided to rear their young on the short grassed prairie lands because they could see all around them. For in those days, ostriches had a short neck, like a guinea fowl or a partridge. They had learned the hard lesson that in the long grass their enemies could attack them before they could raise their danger. To keep her precious eggs safe from the dreaded fires that swept across the plains, the two birds had carefully scratched away a broad band of dusty earth in the ground around a shallow, hollow nest. On the whole, they were happy. They were a happy pair, though. From time to time, the husband had disapproved of his wife's high-spirited ways. After At this particular time, she should behave more sensibly. She had eggs to look after. He wriggled his massive thighs on the ground as he had seen his wife do, to shift into position of the eggs so they would lay more comfortably in their bed. He settled down in his long night's wait. In the full moon, the silvery light shed strange shadows and threw up ghostly figures. Among the surrounding mounds of earth, he heard his head was beginning to nod with weariness. When he became of his wife's hissing and laughing, he was wide awake in a moment. Straining his short neck to its utmost limit, he saw her dodging in and out between the termite mounds in wild games of hide and seek with some young handsome ostrich in hot pursuit. This would never do. He half rose from the nest, but sank back down with a sigh. He dare not leave the precious eggs, whatever the reason. What if they were to grow cold? While he went to tell his flirting wife what he thought of her disgraceful behavior. He settled down with a feeling of annoyance, but strained his neck further and further to try to catch sight as she dodged and raced between the termite mounds in the moonlit veld. From time to time, he did catch a glimpse of her and heard her foolish giggles. And each time that he did so, he strained and stretched his neck, trying to see further and yet further between the nearby termite mounds. At last, the long, tedious night came to an end. As it did so, his wife appeared out of the gray distance to take over her duties once more. The ostrich rose stiffly, preparing to punish his wife for her undignified behaviors. But as he did, he felt a strangeness in the muscles of his neck. He looked down at his feet and was alarmed to discover how very far away from his head they were. He realized, as a result of all the straining that he had done in the long night, his neck had stretched and stretched and stretched. He tried to shake it back to its former length, but no matter what he did, it stayed just the same. He had stretched beyond return. And that is why the ostrich has a long neck, a lasting memory of a flighty wife. That type of story can be told around a fire, and it largely is told to impart values. Wives shouldn't be flighty. That's up to each culture, I guess. All the world is a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. Storytelling happens in many situations, from kitchen table conversations to religious ritual, from telling from telling in the course of other work to performance for thousands of paying listeners. Sometimes, some storytelling situations demand formal, and others are highly informal. Some demand certain themes, attitudes, and artistic approaches, but the expectation about the listener's interaction and the nature of the story itself vary widely. There are many cultures on Earth, each with rich traditions, customs, and opportunities for storytelling. All of these forms of storytelling are valuable, and all are equal citizens in the diverse world of storytelling. Whether we tell our stories in natural spaces, historical landmarks, or cultural sites, there's a story to be told. The use of language distinguishes storytelling. Storytelling always involves the presentation of a story, a narrative. Many other art forms also present stories, but storytelling presents it with words. Some of the stories we tell are our personal connections to the site or the history. However, you tell a story, it must reach the listener on a personal and relatable way. When I tell the story of the American River and its annual migration of salmon, I tell it from my experience, what I have learned over the years, what I have observed, and how it has affected me. But one of my favorite stories isn't a story of my own. This one is a short poem that I've told on a couple occasions with some older students. It's called Salmon. Salmon. He counted 10. He counted them again. He gutted and stripped, leaving the bones. Then carefully returned the bones to the great river. The salmon would come again the following year, and he would be there waiting. That helps set the scene and connects current life along the American River with the history of the American River. It's very short and it's easy to follow. I memorized it quickly and I use it often. But again, it sets the stage of what's happening, who has been there, and who is going to be there in the future. Now we come to a new time in our history, a time where we have to start to tell the story of climate change. Stories are the most powerful way to move people and to change minds. Communicating the harsh scientific realities of climate change may be hard at times, but by illuminating personal accounts of climate, it can help clarify what is at stake for ordinary people. This is where your voice, your story can change the world. One of the things I find is that if I could ask folks, what have you noticed over the course of your life? Does it rain as much as it used to? Here in Northern California, absolutely not. But are the winters earlier? Do the summer rains come later? And they can start the story. And you can follow along with their storyline and say, in my life, I have noticed. And you tell your personal story. And by thinking about their story and listening to your story, we can make a connection. And hopefully, we can even make a change. As Steve Jobs said, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and the agenda of the entire generation that is to come. And that's what we have the opportunity to do. Thanks for listening this evening. I'll be here to answer some questions, and I hope you enjoyed our stories.